All right, so the beef cattle industry is my favorite, just behind small ruminants. And so I definitely am partial to ruminants for sure. This comes from chapter 16 in your book. And like I said, this information is taken directly from the chapter. So if you want to follow up on any of it, feel free to do so. So in the US, beef is the largest money generating commodity, right? So beef is top in the US, and but swine, as we talked about before, is top in the world. 6% of the world's cattle is produced in the United States, which is a lot. And 18% of the world's veal, beef and veal, come from the United States. And again, like I said, beef production is the major industry. 11% of our beef that is produced is exported to other countries. So this is just looking at the cash crop receipts, which is indicative of basically the beef industry in general and or agriculture in general, but we can see that crops in the US are about 54%. All other livestock, excluding beef, is 28%, and then beef alone comprises 18% of that. As you guys may be aware, Angus is the most popular cattle breed in the United States. One thing I do want to point out though with Angus cows is to be considered Angus or Black Angus, the animal only has to be about 50% Angus genetics. So it's quite common to have what we refer to as commercial Angus, which would be Angus kind of composite mixed with other breeds. Some normal ones that we would cross would be Angus and Hereford. We get what you call Black Baldy. It's what we see the black cows that look like an Angus, but will have a white face. You can also find Angus cows being crossed with Charolais, as well as many others. Brahman is a big one too in the South. To cross Angus and Brahman to get a Brangus, which can still be sold as Black Angus, but the Brahman genetics help it to be able to be more productive in the drier, hotter climates. When we think about the beef industry, one major reason why we use beef cows versus another is because they're able to use resources that would otherwise be wasted. And we think of this predominantly as grass, forage beef cows. It's important, again, we talk about the structure of a rumen and a ruminant stomach, that they're able to efficiently convert roughages and grasses into usable energy and nutrient sources. Cattle, we think of them as also being quite adaptive, and so they're able to be managed easily in an extensive environment. And this is an example of an area where forages would go to waste, but we are able to come in and we raise beef cows to be able to take advantage of those forages. And we see this a lot in kind of somewhat mountainous regions, or a lot of hills that have a lot of rocks, because you can't come in, you can't dig up these rocks, you can't cultivate this land, but you are able to graze ruminants on this. So we could easily graze sheep or goats as well. We also feed a lot of agronomy wastes. So we talked about this in the nutrition section, and these include the distillers grain, citrus pulp, beet pulp, products or byproducts of the soybean industry, wheat midds, other recycled minerals. It's kind of interesting with recycled minerals. What you can find is minerals where people recycle electronics. They take those minerals and process them down back into more of a pure mineral form and then feed them to livestock. It's a way to recycle. If you happen to use this source, though, be careful, because you want to know where the recycling is taking place, because you can end up with plastics or residues being stuck on the minerals, and you're feeding those to cows, and those can end up being toxic or detrimental to health. And this is just some examples again of waste products. This chart shows us the cattle inventory in the United States. On the x-axis, we have year, starting from 1867 all the way to 2017, when this book was just before this book was published. On the y-axis, we have inventory. And what you can see is that between the 70s and 80s, this is when we had peak inventory in the United States. But what's interesting is that though the number of beef cows are declining, we're seeing an increase in the amount of beef being produced. So we have smaller herds now, but we're producing more meat than when we had bigger herds. And that's because we were being able to increase genetics, nutritional programs, overall management, and we're able to shift demands in the market and the packers. So it's basically advances in science or animal science. Beef production is divided into more phases in terms of the structure of the industry, and we'll look at this. But the major segments are seed stock producers, commercial cow-calf producers, yearling and stock operators, and feedlot finishing operators. Now, we do have ones that are calving to finishing operators that kind of encompass all of these. These are very, very, very small percentage of producers. And that's the type of production that Berea College Farm does. And so when I'm talking about the industry itself, I'm not specifically talking about Berea College Farm because it is a niche market, or that would be more of the small mom and pop producers or people who have cows that they raise for fun rather than those that are actually producing within the industry. Again, Berea College does not do that. They do what we call direct to consumer. Now this figure and shows you the different segments of the industry, and with each time you see an arrow, the animals are changing hands or changing ownership. And so we have seed stock producers. These are the ones that produce animals for their genetics. And so once they're produced, they can either stay within the seed stock, grow a brood stock, so there'll be cows or dams to be bred and used on cow-calf producers. So basically, they breed the animals, they have a calf, and they raise them up to a certain age or weight. The other option for seed stock animals is once they are not productive or get old, we can cull those animals and send them to slaughter. After the cow-calf production occurs, there are various fates. Could be cull animals, so old animals could be cull. Or we can send lighter calves to what we call a stocker operation, which is where they specifically will grow these cows out to a more mature weight, or the heavier calves will send directly to feedlot for finishing. From here, the finished animals will go to slaughter. And so in this feedlot, it's where they end up feeding a lot more of the concentrates. They're trying to put on that last little bit of fat to be able to get the ideal marbling for the producers, or sorry, for the consumers. So consumer demand is for a certain type of marbling for a certain amount of fat in the meat and the different cuts. And so that's what they're working on getting in the feedlots. Again, seed stock production, these are the ones where they produce breeding stock. So these animals are not directly used for consumption, rather to improve their genetics. In this segment, we most often see bulls being produced because when you can take a bull and semen and be able to impregnate multiple cows or fertilize many different embryos from one bull, one collection of semen, rather than having one cow. So if you're constantly trying to increase the genetics with a cow, you have to wait 9 months each time before they have a calf. The other example we talked about previously was if we use embryo transfer, and that's one technique they can use in the females to kind of increase it, but still the bull and working with bulls is the faster way to improve genetic gains. We have cow-calf producers again. This is where a producer would take their cows and get them pregnant. And this is considered that first phase of producing animals for meat. The product is 6 to 10 month old, so they'll be raised to being 6 to 10 month old, or between 300 and 700 cows, and then they will send those off to either a stocker or a finisher operation. Yearling or stocker is where they just grow calves to be heavier and then finish them out to go to the market. Or finish them out to go onto the feedlot operations, and the feedlots are where they finish them out to go to market. Here, they take in the 600 and 800 pound cows, they finish them, get that ideal marbling, the ideal product, and then we'll send them off. I'm going to briefly go over some of the reproduction, but Ben is going to go a lot more. He's specifically going to talk about ways we synchronize cattle within the industry and the way we're able to control the breeding season so that we control calving to be able to hit specific markets. There are between 300 and 1,000 breeds and strains of cattle around the world. But in the US, we have major ones. So we have the Texas Longhorn, the Shorthorn, Hereford, so these are red ones. You'll see them a lot in this area. Black Angus. There's also a red Angus though. A Brahman, and then this composite breed. And again, composite breeds just mean that it's a mix of various breeds. So this is when we talk about breeding and reproduction, the goal is to produce one calf per year. And that's when we have reproductively mature females. To do this, a cow must be in calf within 85 days of calving their most recent calf. And so if we want to look at this chart on the right, at the top, we can see calving. And this is showing an entire year, 365 days. So once a cow calves, it undergoes a period of uterine involution. So during reproduction, when there's a calf, the uterus gets very expanded, very much. There's a lot of space, it gets very big. And so it has to go undergo involution, which is where it basically kind of shrinks back up and gets back to normal. Once this occurs and the animal will begin to resume its ovarian activity, which means it becomes cyclic again. It transitions from a period of anestrus, which is during the uterine involution, to having estrus cycles. From there, we have to detect estrus, decide if we want to breed, and get her bred within 45 days if we want to maintain this one calf a year cycle. Because remember, beef cows gestation is 9 months. Typically, when we have young cows, they're managed so that they'll first calve at 2 years of age. So they're first bred around 15 months. To do this, they also have to be at least 65% of their adult weight. And we looked at this kind of associated with weight and puberty, but it also, when they reach puberty, affects when they can get bred. Now, the Berea College farm does not operate in this way, and please keep that in mind. This again is just the figure we showed you with reproduction. The cow has a 21-day estrus cycle going from ovulation to ovulation. There's the follicular phase just before ovulation and the luteal phase. Just to see if you all are awake. Let's see, who's paying attention? Emily, what is the major hormone during the luteal phase? Trinity?
Sorry, my Zoom's like kind of acting up right now. My internet's kind of going in and out. I'm trying to get it fixed. I kind of missed like the last 10, 15 minutes. We're trying to figure out what's wrong with it.
You're fine. Let's see. Jade, are you there?
Is it estrogen?
No, luteal phase.
Oh. That's not progesterone, is it?
It is progesterone, P4. And that would mean estrogen is high during the follicular phase. Remember, follicles produce estrogen. The corpus luteum is producing progesterone. We can have calves that can calve out all year, but typically the spring or the fall is preferred. Naturally, the cows would be bred in the fall and calve in the spring so that their calves would have the best chance of survival. But in the industry, we also kind of flip the market and we'll synchronize in the spring so they calve out in the fall. And this Ben will talk more about the market associated with this. Again, gestation is 9 months. Estrus cycle is 19 to 21 days. Estrus lasts 13 to 17 hours. Normally, the ways that we breed beef cows is either natural service with a bull or artificial insemination. We've talked a lot about nutrition and ruminants, so this is mostly going to be a quick review. Cattle are ruminants, and what we want to do is maximize the use of forages. The requirements, again, depends on production, whether in maintenance, lactation, gestation, etc., and the overall goals of the operation. Again, we're feeding the microbial population for that symbiotic relationship. Cows, they swallow and eat, and it enters the reticulum first, which is something I've seen. People have said that it enters second. It actually, may not be the best. There's a membrane right in here so that it actually will fall down into the reticulum first. It is then regurgitated, ruminated, and brought back into the rumen. If the particles are still big, though, they can fall back into the reticulum. And the rumen is where microbial fermentation takes place, and that's where the VFAs are produced. VFAs are then absorbed through the wall of the rumen into the portal blood system to travel to the liver. What does not get converted directly into energy here is then passed through the omasum into the abomasum, the true stomach, and then to the small intestine, large intestine, etc. In health, we do have a few challenges when we're managing health in beef cattle, because we want to keep them as productive as possible. And so when we create this herd health management program, we want to look at adequate nutrition, sanitation, vaccination, and then parasite control. It's always better to prevent rather than have to cure. A common disease that happens is called calf diarrhea or scours, and it's basically in newborn calves. And it's caused by several agents just after parturition, right? So these could be bacterial, viral, or protozoa, or they could be non-infectious. And a lot of these bacteria, viruses, and protozoa are common within the environment. And so it's not something you can really go out there and rid your operation of. Cows that are not receiving adequate colostrum and not receiving the antibodies from the dam early on are more susceptible to having scours and developing this diarrhea. If it's too severe, the calf can become hydrated. The infection can take over and it can be fatal. The next one we have is called bovine respiratory disease. It's also known as shipping fever because it occurs commonly when cattle are shipped from place to place. It can then result in pneumonia or inflammation of the lung. It's very important to that cattle industry because it can cause a lot of loss. It can cause a lot of stress, which reduces growth rates and other indicators of productivity. It can be caused by viruses or bacteria within the environment. It can also be caused by stress factors, again, commonly seen with shipping. It can be caused by weaning, transport, crowding, and poor ventilation. This is a picture of a lung of a feedlot steer. It died from shipping fever. And basically what's happened is in a cow, we have bacteria that are actually living and present in humans as well. They're in the environment, in the nostrils, in the respiratory system. When an animal becomes stressed or sick, the normal balance of that can get off. The animal can be susceptible to a disease. It can kind of basically take over and cause the animal to have pneumonia. And that is where the bovine respiratory disease is mainly going to come from. We can see nasal discharge happen, and this is one major indicator that the animal is sick. Another disease we come across is called black leg. It's not contagious, and it's almost 100% fatal. So it's one of those we definitely want to prevent. It's called spike clostridial disease, and it occurs in cattle between 6 months and 2 years of age. Especially occurs when the calves are fast growing. So sometimes in some of the intensive production systems where the growth rates are pushed to the max, that's where we can see this occur. What happens is the animal ingests spores during grazing, and that is how it ends up being absorbed through the rumen in the digestive system, crossing the crossing the intestines and getting into the blood system of the animal. We vaccinate against this, and we typically will vaccinate between 2 and 6 months of age. Again, prevention is much better than trying to treat this, since it is going to kill any cow infected. Thank you to TR. He's also talked about bloat in this class previously, so I'm going to do a quick review. Bloat is when there is excessive gas built up in the rumen. Excuse me. We can see that in this cow. Remember, the rumen sits on the left side of the animal. The rumen here is full of gas, and it's caused the stomach basically to protrude out to the left side, especially. If it's not relieved, the compression on the heart and lungs can be fatal. We have 2 types of bloat. TR has mentioned previously. We have frothy bloat, and then free gas bloat. So gassy bloat. The easiest way to relieve this is to pass a tube in through the mouth, down the trachea, or down the esophagus, into the rumen. So this is the reticulum, this is the reticulorumal orifice, and then if you pass it into the rumen, you're able to give that gas a way to escape. If that doesn't work, another thing you can do is use what we call a trocar, or create a cannula that's punched into the side of the rumen. And so this tool is kind of like a really fat needle. If you punch it through, because the rumen sits right there next to the body wall, you're able to create a direct hole into the rumen to relieve that bloat. You want to use this as a last resort. You don't want to directly go to using a trocar, because it increases the risk of infection in the animal, and also it can be painful and stressful. For frothy bloat, it's a little bit different, and so you'd have to use anti-foaming agents to be able to disperse some of the foam. What you do is you take and put that tube down the esophagus again, and then you can put that foaming agent down. There are some old-fashioned remedies you'll see. You may see these on some of the smaller production systems still. This would be linseed oil or turpentine, but these are not as effective as some of the commercial products. If it occurs in cattle on pasture, you should remove them immediately and put them on high fiber diet. And that's basically because they are consuming forages or a feedstuff that they are fermenting too quickly in their stomach, and it's producing these high amounts of gas. And then you should not graze the pasture for 10 days. And bloat is commonly associated with feeding issues. So overall in the industry, we are using cattle to make use of these resources that would go to waste. The US is a major beef producer and consumer throughout the world. And again, beef is the top animal industry here in the United States. And to be able to effectively manage the beef cow, you got to understand the nutrition, reproduction, and diseases. This slide is just telling you an introduction to Ben. So he is he works in beef extension at the University of Kentucky, and will be talking about managing reproduction in beef cows.